Check. Can you all hear me? Ladies and gentlemen, the atrocities in Syria are beyond the imagination of anybody sitting in this room. Assad has turned the military and the regime against the very people of his state. He's turning his armored tanks against innocent villagers, men, women, and children. These atrocities have gone on for too long. The international community has done nothing but pay lip service to the kind of atrocities that have gone on. Side government thinks that something needs to be done and something needs to be done urgently. In my speech today, I'm going to do a couple of things. I'm first going to lay out the model that we propose, and then going to look at a couple of key questions. Why aren't current methods working? Why does Assad need to go? Why will our intervention work? Third, why won't any other methods proposed work? And lastly, why is it the prerogative of the international community to intervene? Let's dive straight away into the model. We have a couple of prompts that I want to explain here. First, the international community and the coalition of the willing must prioritize surgical strikes. So the NATO, the Arab League, Turkey, Qatar, and any other country that is willing to intervene and put forces on the ground. Neutralize tanks, and you must neutralize the armed convoy that Assad so well uses to go against his own people. Because it's not possible for them to defend against the combined military expertise that NATO, the West, or Qatar, and Turkey or the Arab League possess. The second thing, you must set up a buffer zone for Syria, for people escaping at the Syria-Turkey border, which means you must facilitate refugees, you must set up missions for humanitarian aid. This is the buffer zone where you train the rebels who want to be trained, but if they aren't enough, then we are ready to put our own soldiers on the ground, which is the second option, not the most preferred one. The third thing, preferably you capture a member of the regime and you train your soldiers to do that. You capture those who have done these atrocities against them, but if push comes to shove, we are okay with killing the members of this regime because we think they absolutely must go. There is no other alternative in place. Last, if you feel the need, we think you can put UN observers on the ground for post-conflict scenarios in order to establish some sort of working democracy, in order to establish systems that work within this place. But lastly, we also want to set up a national transition council like happened in Libya, which can comprise of members of different communities and ethnicities, which can also have members of the Alawite community, those who have not been part of the regime. So the model is pretty clear. Our stance is this. He has been given enough ways in which to redeem himself. He hasn't shown any positive measures in stopping the kind of atrocities that he has gone on with. We think if he does not go immediately, innocents will continue to die. He must go. Have a seat, sir. So let's look at this. Why aren't current methods working? Because we have tried absolutely everything that we could at this point in time, which means sanctions have been tried, UN envoys have been sent, Arab League observers have been sent, Kofi Annan has himself gone to that place, but he hasn't stopped. What are the kinds of things he has done? Simple eyewash, which means he has promised you he'll stop, but just yesterday in Hawla, 50 innocent children were found dead. We think that's the sort of atrocities that he's willing to engage in. But more than that, initially we were ready to negotiate with him, but right now he shows no signs of making any progress with the international community or with observers who go there. Assad knows that he has enough money stashed overseas to carry on the kind of conflict that he needs to carry on. And that is why he is confident of his abilities to carry on the repression that goes on since status quo. Which means if no change is made, this repression will simply wipe out the resistance movement that we see in Syria today. We think that's why international intervention at this point is an absolute must. Let's look at the second point that I want to bring to you. Why will our intervention work? Very first and simple point. Because we have better equipment than what Assad possesses in status quo. And I look at this at two levels. Because there are two main suppliers of weapons to Assad today. First, Iran. And Iran simply does not have the kind of weapons expertise that other countries that are willing to engage in this kind of coalition possess. So that's neutralized. But secondly, Russia provides him weapons. And Russia does not want or will not want to provide their A-grade weapons because there's a danger of the Syrian army developing on them or using on them. Which means Russia will only provide their second-hand weapons or their old weapons. We think we have enough to neutralize that. But the second argument is this, that given that there will be some kind of progress made, defections are what we will likely see. Which means the kind of minorities that exist in the army who are not Alawite, do not have some sort of ideological connection with Assad, do not have some sort of long-binding commitment. Which means once we start to have defections is when the army and the very structure that Assad holds dear to the kind of repression that he does will crumble in the first place. We think that is how we make progress under our side of the house. Before we move on, sir,
I think this motion demands that you give us a concrete list of nations which you think will participate in this, and you can't just say, in general, NATO, in general, the UN will agree.
So I trusted side opposition to know which countries are part of the NATO, but I also told you countries like Arab League, countries like Qatar and Turkey, who have showed the willingness to go against Assad and to send their envoys then to crack down on the kind of atrocities that he goes on. Let's move on. Why don't other methods work? And I'm going to look at 3 methods that could possibly but do not work. First, sanctions. A, they have been imposed for too long, but he hasn't shown anything. And B, the reason that they haven't worked is because he knows he has enough oil money stashed away overseas to carry on the kind of repression that he has carried on. Which means he knows that if no one intervenes in the next few months, it's simple for him to wipe the resistance movement out. What's the second alternative? Offering him amnesty. Even that doesn't work, because he is confident in his ability to wipe out the resistance movement, and offering amnesty has the danger of him being tried later on, and that is why he won't accept amnesty as well. But a third method is waiting for UN approval and waiting indefinitely, carrying on the kind of backdoor diplomacy that we would ideally have liked. But that doesn't work, because there's very little cost to Russia of continuing with status quo. It's rather they who gain money from selling weapons to Assad in the first place. Second, they're also well versed in the art of this kind of diplomatic pressure that the West or other countries might put on them, which means there's no incentive for Russia to back down in status quo and have some sort of larger coalition in place. We think then, even without the UN having some sort of consensus, we need to intervene in this scenario. Let's move on to my last point. Why do we think then the international community has a responsibility? The argument is the responsibility to protect, because we think Assad has completely lost any claims that he can make to sovereignty. Because sovereignty only exists when a leader has the best intentions of his people in mind when he makes those policies. And Assad clearly does not have that when he turns his tanks against the peoples, when he raises down villages for no good rational reason. We think then he has lost the claim to sovereignty. But he has also lost legitimacy as a popular leader, because the people don't want him anymore. You see the kind of news that floats around, the kinds of videos where people demand the West to take up some action and to protect their very homes, to protect their lives and to protect their children. Which means in terms of sovereignty and in terms of his claim to having some sort of responsible leadership, he does not have that. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the time to intervene. This is the time to save innocent lives, innocent children. Very proud to propose.